The 1970s gave us some of the greatest music ever made, but behind the stadium giants there was a whole other world. Stranger, darker, and far weirder than most people ever knew. These are the 15 bizarre bands from 1970s you won't believe existed. Band 15, Coven. Before Black Sabbath became the face of dark, occult-themed rock, there was Coven, a Chicago-based group that was doing it first. Coven was formed in the mid-1960s by vocalist Jinx Dawson, bassist Greg Osborne, and drummer Steve Ross. By 1969, they had released their debut album, Witchcraft Destroys Minds and Reaps Souls, on Mercury Records. The record opened with a song called Black Sabbath. A full year before the British band of the same name released their debut, when Rolling Stone's Lester Bangs reviewed Black Sabbath in 1970, he called it England's answer to Coven. That line tells you everything about who came first. What made the album genuinely startling was its final track, a 13-minute recording billed as an actual satanic black mass, complete with Latin chanting. Their producer Bill Trout described it as the first black mass ever recorded. The insert included a poster of the band performing a ritual over a nude Jinx Dawson posed on an altar. Then came the Manson connection, not a real one, but devastating. A photograph surfaced showing Charles Manson holding a copy of their album outside a Los Angeles record store. The band had never met him, but the association was enough. Shows were canceled, albums were pulled from shelves, and the label withdrew support. Coven went on hiatus in 1976. They also hold a remarkable distinction. Credited as the first group in rock to use the now iconic Sign of the Horns hand gesture, visible on their 1969 debut cover, years before it became a metal staple. Band 14, Comus. Comus were a British progressive folk band from Bromley, Kent, and their 1971 debut album, First Utterance, remains one of the most unsettling records ever committed to tape, acoustic instruments and all. The band was formed in 1967 by art students Roger Wooten and Glenn Goring at Ravensbourne College of Art. They drew on folk influences like Bert Jansch and John Renburn, but pushed them somewhere far darker. Lyrics about violence, murder, and psychological breakdown delivered over violin, flute, oboe, and delicately plucked acoustic guitars. The contrast between the beauty of the instrumentation and the darkness of the content was deliberate and deeply unnerving. In the early 1970s, the band performed regularly at David Bowie's Arts Lab project in Beckenham, and Bowie invited them as a support act for his 1969 concert at London's Purcell Rooms. Despite his appreciation, mainstream success never came. First Utterance sold poorly. Folk clubs found it too disturbing. Rock clubs weren't ready for acoustic instruments. Comus dissolved in 1972, existing in a no-man's land between genres. Decades later, the album was rediscovered. Opeth's Mikkel Åkerfeldt named one of his own albums after a lyric from the Comus song, Drip Drip. Metal bands and dark folk artists traced lines back to First Utterance as a founding document of what became known as weird folk. The band reformed in 2008 and played their first UK show in 37 years in 2009 at the Equinox Festival in London. Band 13, Faust. Germany in 1970 was not an obvious place to start one of the most radical bands in rock history. The idea of a distinctly German rock music, not an imitation of British or American sounds, was itself a political act. Faust was formed in Hamburg in 1971, assembled by journalist and producer Uwe Nettelbeck under the Polydor label. The original lineup included Werner Zappi Diermeier, Hans Joachim Irmler, Jean-Hervé Perron, Rudolf Sosna, and Gunther Wüsthof. Polydor hoped Faust would become Germany's answer to the Beatles. They had spectacularly misjudged what they were getting. The band moved into a converted schoolhouse in the rural village of Wumi with their own recording studio. What emerged sounded like nothing else. Tape collages spliced with fragments of folk melody, industrial noise, free improvisation, and rock, all crashing together without warning or apology. Their debut sold fewer than 1,000 copies in Germany. The BBC's John Peel became an evangelist for them in Britain. In 1973, Richard Branson's newly launched Virgin Records released the Faust tapes, a cut-and-paste collage of studio outtakes, priced at 49 pence, the cost of a single. It sold between 60,000 and 100,000 copies. Most buyers had no idea what they were hearing. Faust became one of the central acts of what British critics were calling krautrock. Their influence reached forward into ambient music, industrial music, and post-punk, with bands like Radiohead, Sonic Youth, and Throbbing Gristle citing them as a formative presence. Band 12, Aphrodite's Child. To understand how strange Aphrodite's Child's story is, you have to know who was in the band. The keyboardist was Vangelis, the man who would later win an Academy Award for the Chariots of Fire score. The lead singer and bassist was Demis Roussos, who became one of Europe's biggest pop stars in the mid-1970s. Together, they made one of the most extreme double albums ever released by a major label. The band was Greek, formed in 1967, but based in Paris after a military coup in Greece made returning home dangerous. By 1970, Vangelis had become consumed by an idea, a double concept album based on the Book of Revelation, titled 666. Mercury Records was horrified. When Vangelis delivered the tapes, the label refused to release the album. He waited them out. On the first anniversary of its completion, he booked the recording studio, bought a chocolate cake, invited the band, friends, and journalists, and hosted a listening party for an unreleased record. Salvador Dali attended and declared the album a work of greatness. Mercury eventually relented. 666 appeared in France at the end of 1971 and across Europe in 1972. By then, the band had already broken up. The album was a 24-track double LP spanning more than 2 hours. Acoustic rock songs, electronic noise, tribal percussion, operatic vocals, choral chanting, and one track featuring Greek actress Irene Papas in a performance the label considered pornographic. Vangelis considered it his masterpiece. Today it is regarded as a landmark of progressive rock. John Anderson of Yes was reportedly so taken with it that he approached Vangelis about joining Yes. Vangelis declined and began his solo career instead. Band 11, Gryphon.
There was a nice young serving girl.
Most rock bands of the 1970s were reaching forward into synthesizers, heavy amplification, and studio experimentation. Gryphon reached backward, all the way to the Tudor era. Formed in 1972 at London's Royal College of Music, Gryphon featured instruments largely absent from popular music for 4 centuries: the crumhorn, the bassoon, the recorder. Their founding members, Richard Harvey on recorders and keyboards, Brian Gulland on bassoon and crumhorn, Graham Taylor on guitar, and Dave Oberle on drums, had met through the early music scene and believed Renaissance music still had something to say in the modern world. Their 1973 self-titled debut was entirely acoustic. One track, Pastime with Good Company, had been written by King Henry VIII himself. The album was recorded in an attic studio and sounded unlike anything else in British rock. By 1974, they had evolved considerably. Rick Wakeman of Yes introduced them to Yes's manager Brian Lane, who signed them. They toured as the opening act for Yes across North America and the UK from late 1974 through mid-1975. Their third album, Red Queen to Gryphon 3, released in December 1974, was a fully instrumental concept album structured around the movements of a chess game, blending medieval sensibility with progressive rock complexity. They remained a cult act rather than a commercial one, but Red Queen to Gryphon 3 in particular has never gone out of favor among progressive rock enthusiasts, who regard it as one of the more genuinely unusual records the decade produced.
Knowing it was but the other day.
Band 10, Amon Düül II. The story of Amon Düül II begins not in a recording studio but in a political commune. In the late 1960s, a group of radical artists and activists in Munich formed a collective they called Amun Dul, naming themselves after Amon, the Egyptian sun god, and Dul, a Turkish word for drum. The commune was part of the broader student movement sweeping West Germany, and its members made music as a kind of free improvisation, with minimal concern for technical skill. As the commune grew fractious, the more musically serious members broke away and formed their own group, Amun Dul II. These were musicians with real ambitions. Their first album, Phallus, appeared in 1969, a title that alone guaranteed them a certain notoriety, and was a sprawling psychedelic record unlike anything then coming out of Germany. The 1970 follow-up, Yeti, is now considered a milestone of the krautrock movement. What made Amon Dul too genuinely strange wasn't just the music. Cosmic, menacing, layered with Eastern influences and science fiction imagery, but the context from which they came. Rock music born from a left-wing art commune, built on improvisation and political idealism, filtered through a psychedelic lens at the moment, Germany was reckoning with its own recent past. The group's female vocalist, Renate Knaup-Krotenschwanz, brought a piercing intensity to their recordings that set them apart from their contemporaries. They released a string of acclaimed albums through the early 1970s, Tanz der Lege, Wolf City, Vive la Trance, before shifting toward more accessible music later in the decade. By the late 1970s, the original lineup had largely disbanded, but their records remain one of the more genuinely strange bodies of work in rock history. Band 9, Pavlov's Dog.
Begging for just a bit more and Julie.
Named after Ivan Pavlov's famous conditioning experiments, Pavlov's Dog was a progressive rock band from St. Louis, Missouri, formed in 1972, and their story is one of the more peculiar in American rock. The band featured vocalist David Surkamp, whose voice was so extreme onto a high, wildly vibrating falsetto that listeners either found it revelatory or completely unlistenable. Critics compared it to Geddy Lee of Rush, though Surkamp's vibrato operated at a frequency several degrees more intense. The band also featured a classically trained violinist named Siegfried Carver, born Richard Nadler, whose presence gave Pavlov's Dog a chamber music quality unusual in rock. Their debut album, Pampered Menial, had one of the stranger release histories in rock. It was briefly issued on ABC Records in 1975, then almost immediately re-released by Columbia Records, resulting in two different pressings of the same album, with the same cover art, appearing in stores simultaneously. Producer Sandy Pearlman, who also produced Blue Oyster Cult, oversaw the recording. The album gathered significant critical attention, but the combination of Surkamp's polarizing voice and the band's refusal to simplify their arrangements made commercial success impossible. Their second album, At the Sound of the Bell in 1976, featured former Yes drummer Bill Bruford as a guest musician, an indication of the progressive rock world's respect for them, but it sold no better. Columbia dropped them. Their third album, completed in 1977, sat unreleased and eventually leaked as a bootleg in the 1980s, pressed from stolen master tapes and circulated without the band's name on the sleeve. It was not officially released until 2007, 30 years after it was recorded.
Begging for just a bit more and Julie.
Band 8, Screamin' Jay Hawkins.
Oh! Let it go!
Screamin' Jay Hawkins predates the 1970s. His defining moment came in 1956, but his continuing career through that decade and the way the era received him make him impossible to leave out. Born Jalacey Hawkins in Cleveland, Ohio in 1929, he trained seriously as a vocalist, originally dreaming of opera. He was a Golden Gloves boxing champion and served in the Army before finding his way into R&B clubs in the early 1950s, where he played alongside guitarist Tiny Grimes and developed the theatrical flair that would define him. In 1956, he recorded I Put a Spell on You, a session that legend says occurred while the entire band was thoroughly intoxicated. The result was something no one had planned, a howling, lurching, animalistic performance that barely resembled the straight blues ballad it was meant to be. Radio stations across the country banned it. It sold an estimated 1 million copies over the years, but never charted for Hawkins himself. What followed was a career built around the most theatrical stage show in rhythm and blues, Hawkins emerging from a coffin at the start of every performance, wearing a cape and vampire makeup, waving a skull-topped staff he had named Henry, rolling his eyes at the audience while delivering material that blended genuine vocal power with deliberate absurdity. Throughout the 1970s, he divided his time between Hawaii, New York, and Europe, where he remained a serious draw. He quit drinking in 1974. He once said plainly, "My screaming was always just my way of being happy on stage." Alice Cooper, Arthur Brown, and others who built theatrical rock careers owe something real to the man from Cleveland.
Let it go!
Band 7, Cactus. Cactus was the band that was supposed to be one of the greatest supergroups in rock history, and instead became one of the most chaotic, short-lived, and overlooked. Formed in 1969 and active through the early 1970s, Cactus originally came together when Vanilla Fudge collapsed. Bassist Tim Bogert and drummer Carmine Appice had been approached to form a new group with Jeff Beck and Rod Stewart. Beck's car accident in 1969 derailed those plans, and Bogert and Appice instead recruited guitarist Jim McCarty and vocalist Rusty Day to form Cactus. Band 6, Magma. French progressive rock produced many singular groups, but none as thoroughly alien as Magma, a band founded in Paris in 1969 by drummer Christian Vander. Magma performed music sung entirely in a language that did not exist. Vander invented it himself, calling it Cobayan, after the fictional planet Cobaya, where he imagined the band's mythology unfolding. The Cobayan universe was Vander's full creation, a cosmic narrative in which humanity, having destroyed Earth, departs into space and encounters a civilization on a distant world. The music Magma made was the soundtrack to that story. Heavy, dense, choral, and relentless. Their sound blended elements of Stravinsky, Coltrane, Sun Ra, and Stockhausen with progressive rock heaviness, resulting in something they called Zool, another invented word meaning celestial in Cobayan. The band featured multiple vocalists performing in the invented language over driving, complex rhythms, and sweeping orchestration. Magma's debut album appeared in 1970. From the beginning, Vander made clear this was not entertainment in any conventional sense. It was a mythology. Critics struggled with it. Audiences divided sharply. But the band built a devoted following in France and gradually throughout the European progressive rock world. They released a string of defining albums throughout the 1970s, Mécanique Destructive Commando 1973 being the most celebrated, and inspired an entire subgenre that still has practitioners today. Christian Vander, now in his late 70s, has never stopped performing or recording. Magma remains, by a significant margin, one of the strangest things to have ever emerged from popular music. Band 5, Hawkwind. In the early 1970s, Hawkwind were making space rock for people who took the space part entirely seriously. Formed in London in 1969 by guitarist Dave Brock and guitarist Mick Slattery, Hawkwind grew into one of the most unconventional live acts in British rock. Their concerts were multi-sensory events: strobe lights, fog machines, liquid projections, dancers, including the notorious Stacia, who performed on stage semi-clothed as a living piece of performance art, and music that could sustain a single hypnotic groove for extended periods, pushing the audience into something approaching a trance. The band embraced science fiction as a total philosophy, not just an aesthetic. Their work was deeply connected to authors like Michael Moorcock, who performed and wrote lyrics with them, and the band's mythology was built around interstellar travel, psychedelic consciousness, and visions of dystopian futures. They were associated with the free festival scene and frequently played for free, including at the early Glastonbury festivals. In 1975, a relatively unknown bassist named Lemmy Kilmister was fired from Hawkwind after being arrested at the Canadian border. for possession of what turned out to be speed, which Lemmy, famously, had assumed was cocaine. He went on to form Motorhead, which gives you some indication of the kind of musical energy Hawkwind was working with. By the mid-1970s, the band had become a genuine institution in British alternative culture, beloved by the underground and almost entirely ignored by mainstream radio. Band 4, Captain Beyond. Captain Beyond was built from pieces of bands that had already burned brightly. Rod Evans had been Deep Purple's original vocalist, Larry Reinhardt and Lee Dorman were from Iron Butterfly, and Bobby Caldwell had played with Johnny Winter. On paper, in 1972, this should have produced something enormous. Their self-titled debut album, released that same year, was extraordinary. It moved through shifting time signatures and interlocking instrumental passages with a sophistication that was too complex for the heavy metal audience and too aggressive for the traditional progressive rock crowd. It found no natural home, received little promotion, and sank without trace commercially. The band fractured quickly under the weight of diverging musical visions. Evans, who had been replaced in Deep Purple by Ian Gillan and then by David Coverdale without ever recapturing his footing in rock, retreated from music. The album was left to gather dust. In the decades since, Captain Beyond has been reassessed repeatedly as a lost classic, a record that arrived at exactly the wrong moment, from a band that had no idea how good they were or how little time they had to prove it. Band 3, Lucifer's Friend. Lucifer's Friend was a West German hard rock band with a name that guaranteed them trouble and a sound that suggested they might be worth it anyway. Formed in Hamburg in 1970, the group blended early heavy metal with progressive rock in ways that anticipated the genre's later developments. Their 1971 self-titled debut sits at what one might call the doom metal end of the spectrum. Dark and deliberate, with vocalist John Lawton, who would later join Uriah Heep, delivering performances of genuine power. The band's problem was consistency. Each album they released sounded noticeably different from the last, as they moved from heavy psych rock to funk-influenced material to more melodic AOR territory. This restlessness, which might have been a strength, alienated each audience they had just begun to build. By the time they found a sound that worked commercially, the moment had passed. Lawton's departure to Uriah Heep in 1976 effectively defined how history remembered the band, as a footnote in his career rather than a story in their own right. Their early albums, however, have been revisited by doom metal and heavy psych enthusiasts who find in the 1971 debut a genuinely important record. Band 2, Osibisa. Osibisa arrived in London from Ghana in the late 1960s and proceeded to build something that the British rock scene had no framework for: a fusion of West African highlife music, Caribbean grooves, and searing electric rock that they called crisscross rhythms that explode with happiness. The band was formed by Ghanaian musicians Teddy Osei, Saul Amoak, and Mac Tonto, who had been playing together in Accra and brought that foundation with them when they relocated to Britain. They signed to MCA Records and released their eponymous debut in 1971, the cover illustrated by Roger Dean, the artist who would later become synonymous with Yes album art. The swirling, fantastical elephants and creatures Dean placed on that sleeve were among his earliest major commercial work. His music defied easy categorization. It drew on Ghanaian highlife's interlocking rhythms, Afro-Caribbean percussion traditions, and the high-voltage energy of rock guitar, creating something genuinely joyful and disorienting in equal measure. Their live performances were celebrated for their energy and their ability to move audiences who had come expecting something far more conventional. They were too African for British rock audiences and too rock for traditional African music listeners. The space they occupied was entirely their own, and they never fully found the mainstream footing their energy deserved. Band 1, Gentle Giant.
But in your own funny ways of finding her.
To close with Gentle Giant is to end on a band that was bizarre, not through theatrics or invented languages or satanic rituals, but through sheer, almost reckless musical ambition. Formed in Portsmouth, England in 1970 from the remnants of a band called Simon Dupre and the Big Sound, Gentle Giant built their career on an aesthetic principle that was almost guaranteed to alienate casual listeners. Nothing would be simplified, nothing would be repeated, and no genre would be excluded. Their music drew simultaneously on medieval counterpoint, jazz, avant-garde composition, rock, and Baroque classical forms, and the band insisted on every member playing multiple instruments, often switching mid-performance. Their catalog through the 1970s, Acquiring the Taste, 1971, Octopus, 1972, In a Glass Darkly, 1973, The Power and the Glory, 1974, Freehand, 1975, represented a sustained commitment to complexity that earned them the respect of musicians worldwide and the bewilderment of almost everyone else. Derek Shulman, the band's vocalist, once said plainly that they had no interest in writing hit singles, and they didn't. They toured relentlessly through the 1970s and built a devoted cult audience in North America particularly, where progressive rock found its most committed listeners. By 1980, exhausted and commercially marginalized by the rise of punk and new wave, Gentle Giant disbanded. What they left behind was a body of work that continues to be studied by musicians for its technical sophistication and loved by listeners who find in it a kind of joyful, impossible excess that no other band of the era ever quite managed. And there you have it, 15 bands from the 1970s who existed on the outer edges of what music could be, strange, bold, and almost entirely forgotten by mainstream history. If any of these names were new to you today, do yourself a favor and go find the records. That era of experimentation produced things that still don't sound like anything else decades later. If you enjoyed this video, please like it and subscribe to the channel so you never miss another one. We'll see you in the next one.